Yes.
Well, welcome into Heartfelt Consciousness. Today I'm here with Nischala and Kamala, and we're going to be talking about the Bhagavad Gita book that they are working on. Welcome in, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks
Great
for
to
having
be here.
us.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you both. I'd love to learn a little bit more about how the premise for this new project came to be.
Would you like to start, Nischala?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Namaste. I'm smiling, which you can't maybe see on the audio, but it's always a interesting process how these things come together. And some of you know I've written a commentary on the Yoga Sutras, which is the secret power of yoga, and wondered what my next project would be, and had been thinking about doing the Gita for many years. And every time I opened it, I read a couple of pages, closed it, and put it back on my shelf. And then something very interesting happened, as we'll talk about with the Gita. A little bit of Dharma and Karma came together, I guess you could say. And I was talking to a very prominent person in the yoga field who's extraordinarily giving and has an organization called Yoga Gives Back. And we were talking after an interview, and she said, "What would you like to do next?" And I said, I really don't know, but I've been thinking about the Gita. And she said, "I know just the person who's also thinking about doing the Gita. Maybe the two of you could meet." And the rest is history. We met and we realized that we were complementing each other. We had different sides to bring together to make this a complete book from both the scholarly and the intuitive mystical part, both sides, which is not always the case when you find someone. So I feel that we had this incredible chemistry that allowed us to begin to bring forth this book, which we call a woman's Gita, because there's many, many Gitas written, of translation written, but they're all men. And they all come from a very male, masculine point, which the Gita really lends itself to. It's a very masculine book, but we've hopefully softened the edges a little bit and made it something that would be something women would want to read and get the amazing wisdom out of that. So that's where we are now. We've started a podcast. We now have 2 episodes. It's called A Woman's Gita. And this is the precursor to the book, which we're still working on. You want to add something, Kamala?
I would. When you told our story, Nischala, and hi to all of our listeners today. I'm Kamala Rose, and I also, like Nischala, have been thinking about this project with the Bhagavad Gita for many, many years. In fact, I have worked as an ambassador for Yoga Gives Back and for several years. And as a monastic, it was really the only public presentations that I have done in the last several years was for Yoga Gives Back as a project for Seva. And I've been talking about the need for feminine interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita for many years and done many presentations on this. And it kind of came to the point where I thought, well, maybe it's time to move on to something else. It hasn't picked up any legs yet, and I was going to move on when Kayoko introduced me to Nishtala, and once we started talking, we really haven't stopped talking about it. And we spend many, many hours a week together. I think I spend as much time with Nishtala Devi as I do with my dear dogs that I live with. I think this has just really absorbed so much of my life, and rightly so. It's a project that warrants a lot of time and consideration. And it's in so much earnestness that we are really hoping that we can help to make the Gita more accessible to the women that we know who, like Nischala said, you open it up and so many yoga teachers just close it and don't really understand so much of what's going on. And we're hoping to ameliorate this situation.
I love that. I think that is really important. And I know listening to the women in the industry, we have a lot of students. Many of them, most of them are women. I do think that there is a hunger, a desire to get that perspective and to be affirmed in a female perspective. So tell me a little bit about the podcast. How do you break up such a massive spiritual work like the Gita into these bite-sized discussions?
Well, I think one of the first parts that we're doing we're talking about our process in doing it. And the two main things, I think the two main obstacles that came for us was talking about the war and how we deal with the war, which is such a prominent piece in this. And everything, it's almost like the wheel that everything floats off of because everything comes back to it. How to deal with that as women, especially because many of us are not in favor of war. Mm-hmm. And especially, I think those that are either physical mothers or just feel the role of mother in society, that we don't want to see. And I'm going to say it this way, the best of the best going off to be killed. We have a little quote in the book that is a famous quote from before, to the victor go the spoils. Nobody wins in a war. So that was a really difficult piece for us. And the other that we're still struggling with is the supreme deity and trying to make that more universal, rather than having just one Krishna or one anything in that matter, because to understand that the basis, the truth is one, paths are many, is that you can choose any path and any particular aspect of the divine or none and still get to that place. So I think those were our real challenges, and we tried to address those in the first couple episodes of the podcast.
Yes, it's been quite a process of trying to break down what is the necessary information. Also, I think we both got to the place of realizing that every dialogue on the Bhagavad Gita sort of required an introductory class in the Sanatana Dharma in order to get started with the Gita. And I think that's something that we're trying to help minimize and just make it a little easier to get into. The idea of the war and the setting of it is, it's hard for modern yoga students who learn about ahimsa to understand how the text that really stands next to the Yoga Sutra as our main teachings on the path of yoga is leading with a situation of violence. And in fact, the teacher is encouraging Arjuna over and over to participate in the war. We've gone back and forth on this so much because it is difficult for us to reconcile today. And, being both of us pacifists and standing very much not in favor of war. I am a mother, and my son's first day of school was 9/11. Oh. And I had to go pick him up from school, and so the idea of a draft has always been in my mind, and protecting my son from any type of situation that might be encountered as his mother has been a big part of my life. So the Gita brings forward a lot of these ideas for us, and in a way, anyone who reads the Gita has to come to some reconciliation over this, either to know that I stand in opposition to this argument, or I have found a way to make my peace with it. So I think this is some of what we're trying to address in our first episodes of the podcast is, how did we get here? What is the backstory? And to make it understandable and digestible to our listeners.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that the concepts found within the Gita are, advanced spiritual concepts. And it's not, I like to say it's a yes and, right? It's like, it is. And so I think that what y'all are doing is really, profound, especially given the current climate and everything that's going on. And, many of your listeners, I'm sure, can really feel into what it feels like to be, conflicted around this particular topic, and how it impacts their lives and their belief systems. So I'm really excited to hear, how you're planning on developing and evolving the podcast over the course of this creative process. Where do you think it's going to go, given what is going on in our political and environmental climate?
Our plan is we don't have too much of a plan. We're sort of seeing how it goes from episode to episode, but we are going to go through the slokas and talk about them and show how we have reworked them to be more life-affirming and more toward the feminine, heart-centered. Some of them very difficult to do, others a little bit easier. But what comes glaringly to us from the Bhagavad Gita is that there are no women in the Gita. The only time the women are referenced is really in a derogatory form. And that can't stand. That can't stand. The fact that it stood all these thousands of years is a curiosity to me. It shows who was in charge and who wanted to keep it in that particular way. So we're working with that, and as we go through it, and we get stuck because we're reworking the slokas themselves. Because even there, beside the translation, there's so much that has to be updated and consciousness raising in what they're saying. Yeah.
I think taking the initial setting, working with the initial setting, and as Nischala said, reworking the shlokas so that I think it's important that when people are able to have the book, which, as she said, we're looking for publishers, when you have the book, that I feel it's so important that anywhere you open should feel inviting and warm and filled with inspiring truth, which is the purpose of any scripture like this. In particular, we're working very hard to bring the yoga forward and to play down a lot of the cultural parts that just don't apply to us in the West today. I mean, we're trying to be very clear that we're writing for a Western audience who's really not familiar with so much of the traditional reading of the Bhagavad Gita that involves caste, and a certain view towards gender that we've evolved out of in the West. We've had a women's movement, we've had civil rights movements, and we're in a different place. And we hope that our writing will be able to reflect this, and that modern Western, especially female yogis, will be able to take the teachings on karma yoga, in particular, on bhakti yoga and jnana yoga, into their hearts and find that in their Gita, and play down some of the war and the cultural context.
So what I hear you saying is that this is a remarkable opportunity for us to really elevate the Gita and make it more affirming, and a resource for practitioners to draw inspiration from, is really what I hear you saying. What is your most, I guess, what is your favorite, each one of you, what is your favorite shloka in the Gita, or perhaps topic within the scripture?
That's a positive or not a positive?
It's just your favorite. Maybe you like a challenge. I know you like a challenge. So maybe it's something that it speaks to you because you know that there is something there that can be affirming, but perhaps it's not yet transformed.
Well, I have one that's pretty funny that hasn't been transformed, and I'm just trying to see if I can find it right now. But anyway, I'll paraphrase it, and it's been one that I've been using because there's it's so blatant. I guess that's why. And as a young student, one of the things that I always balked at was when my teacher kept saying things like that. So the sloka, and again, I'll paraphrase it. It's talking about the 10-gated city. I'm sorry, the 9-gated city, in reference to the body and how the body works in this particular way. And it's very clear. It says 9-gated. So that means the openings by which things go into the body and things also come out of the body. So as a disciple, I would sit there and listen to my guru, male Indian guru, talk about this. And I would sit there and I would count. And I'd say 2 eyes is 2, 2 nostrils 4, 2 ears 6, 1 mouth 7, 8, 9, 10. Oops. And I'd recount to make sure that I actually counted right. And then I would go up to him after satsang, because I had a group that I was already teaching, and I knew I would answer to them the next morning. So I'd very hopefully, respectfully say, Swamiji, I know you keep quoting that, but do you realize that there's 9 in men, but 10 in women? And he'd look at me and go, And he said, the scripture says 9. I said, yes, but women have 10. And he wouldn't budge. And what I realized, that the one that they don't count is the one they all came out of. And to not even respect the fact that that happened, that a woman has the power to make another human being and pop it out of her body through a small hole, just really drove me absolutely wild. Mm-hmm. And I would do this every time he said it. I would go up and do the same thing. So when we came across it again, doing the translation, it was easy. It was an easy one. So that's the kind of thing, to me, it's a blatant disregard for the power of women, not just women, but the power of women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's your
beautiful example? Beautiful example. Kamala.
Yes, I agreed. That is that needs some updating. And another one that we really came to a little more traditional translation on. One of my favorites is in chapter 4. Brahman is the offering. Brahman is the offered by Brahman into the fire of Brahman. I love this. I love the teachings on a supreme and universal spirit that are included in the Gita. And in this verse, Krishna gives us this idea that by watching the interconnection of things, the places where matter or substance and spirit are in relationship to each other, we're able to see through a veil into a real interaction between matter and spirit that is making our world. I'm quite a naturalist also, Michelle, and I really love the idea of being able to look to nature as a teacher in instructing us in these high spiritual truths. I think that going forward in the world we live in, if we're not able to reconcile a sense of environmentalism, to hopefully channel our spirituality into offsetting some of the disasters of our climate catastrophe, I'm not sure if our spirituality serves us anymore, if it doesn't have an account for or a reverence for nature embedded in it. And so this is really what this verse means to me, is really stepping into the world and seeing this dynamic play of consciousness in everything as a form of revelation. And one of my favorite verses.
I love that. I agree with you completely in that, we really, the microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm. And this, if we're really living in avidya, if we're looking around at the way that the earth's health is manifesting and we're not seeing the impact that we're having on that, that is the definition of ignorance. So I completely agree with you. I think that's a wonderful takeaway. I'm curious to find out, what feedback you're getting from your students, from your peers. How are people receiving this?
Well, all I can go by is we have about 750 people who have joined the podcast. So I think there's a hunger for it. I think there's a need for it. One of the things I wanted to mention too is the difference between the sutras and the Gita for the student, not how it's written. That's pretty obvious. But I don't think people realize, but the Yoga Sutras were written for, or compiled really, is more of a proper way of describing it. They weren't really written. They were taken from other scriptures. They were compiled for people who have 100% commitment to the spiritual life. So this was written for Brahmins. This was written for sadhus. This is written for sannyasins. This was a how-to book, a cookbook, if you like, of how to get from where we are to realization of the self, period. That's all it cares about. It doesn't care about a whole lot of other things. The Gita was specifically written for a particular class of people, caste of people, class in our words or thinking. And these were the kshatras. These were the warriors, the merchant class. These were the people who worked and you did their prayers or whatever in between that. Their main thing was to serve people, to be there out in service. And the Gita was written to give them the opportunity to continue their service while still adding to their spiritual life. And I think that's the real difference in it, because most people today do not go into monasteries or ashrams. Matter of fact, I was just reading about it, how few are doing this really. Most people are bringing the spirit into their life, into their everyday life. And that's really where the Gita shines. This is the instruction given, the karma yoga that you bring your spiritual practice into. So I think that's something to people, and different books at different moments. Who are you at this moment? Are you the sadhu? Are you the householder? Who are you? And I think that helps people understand their position in society and the ability to bring the spirit into that, whatever they're doing. Garbage collector, doctor, doesn't matter. They're still doing the same thing. They're both trying to keep people healthy. And that's the important thing that I think we're looking for.
And in addition, the Bhagavad Gita, as Nischala said, really brought the teachings of yoga into the mass public. right? It became a text for everyone, yoga for everyone, and brought these ideas of karma yoga, of service as your work, as your participation in the world. I mean, so important. As yoga teachers, we're certainly performing karma yoga by teaching our classes every morning and evening. And it also brought bhakti yoga in, and the importance of this really can't be understated, that how important bhakti has been to the evolution of spiritual thought across the world. It's really something that everyone can do. Everyone can love. Everyone can live their lives wholeheartedly and participate in what they do with a sense of offering their actions to a divine. They can love what they do, and they can see the divine in that. And I hope this will be a good takeaway from our work. As far as the feedback we've gotten, I think we're just both so happy that we have people that are listening to our podcast and supporting it. And I hope they'll continue to love it. Many themes we will continue to develop in the podcast as we're writing, as we're working together. Although Nischala, Devi, and I have so much in common, we're also see things differently. I'm coming from a background that's more, my guru is a woman, and so I just didn't have the same experience. I wasn't in a Vedic ashram, but I have a lot more reading in esoteric Christianity, a lot more reading in theoretical science and things like that I like to draw in. And Nischala has such an extraordinary range from her work with the sutras, and really a gift for working with the text that I'm excited for people to be able to read.
I think one of the things that is interesting to note, that we talked about the sutras and then the Gita. Kamala and I both have similar backgrounds in that we were both monastics. So we were both, I assume she was a student of the sutras, I don't know.
Yes.
But yes. And now we're both out in the world, more or less, and we're working on the Gita. So I think that's a really interesting, it's one thing to talk about being a monastic, it's another thing to have lived it. Mm-hmm. And both of us lived it long enough, over 20 years each, that we really understand what it means to dedicate yourself 100%, 24/7 to the spiritual life, and how we can then take that into the world and still live that kind of life while serving. And I think that those two scriptures serve those purposes in a very clear way, Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. I loved the work that you did with the sutras, Nischala. We always refer back to that because of the perspective and the way that you were able to really work with the sutras to create a more organic and holistic understanding of it that's much more applicable, I think, to today's yoga student, yoga teacher, than the sutras are just dry if you're just reading the translation and you don't have that background. So I'm really excited to see where this goes. So tell us how we can find the podcast. What's it? It's Women's Gita. What channels are you on?
We're everywhere. What do they say? Everywhere the podcasts are given, we're there.
Wherever you follow your podcast.
Yes, follow your podcast and your heart to a Woman's Gita. It's everywhere. And I think that the other thing that people should know is that most of the parables now in them, like what I did in the sutras, are women-centered. They're no longer about the woman who was a good wife because she did this or this for her husband. Now we're finding things that empower women in everyday life. And I think that's the other thing that makes it so different and so unique in that, because most people who are practicing yoga in the United States are women. We have to appeal to that. And why it hasn't been done before, I always try to think of that. Why, with all the scholars and all the people, didn't they see that women weren't included? And we're more than half the population of the world. So it's more than time. It's way overdue. And we're hoping that people read it and use it to live their lives in a spiritual way. That's our hope.
We hope that our listeners will subscribe to our podcast. It's coming out every 2 weeks. We've been recording what we think that our listeners would like to hear, but if anyone would love to leave us topics or questions in the comments, we sure would love to hear it. We're looking to cover the things that our peers, our female yoga teachers, have questions about. Try to clarify that. I look at the Bhagavad Gita as both a spiritual text and a product of history, and that a text that's adapted over history. Also, the larger poem of the Mahabharata, a poem that has adapted over history, and this latest incarnation of it that we're working with, I hope will be a welcome addition to every yogi's library.
Oh, well, I'm really excited. I can't wait to subscribe and tune in myself. A Woman's Gita, wherever you get your podcast. Definitely check it out, and we'll all be waiting in anticipation for the book to be born. So we're really excited for both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to us. And thank you for having us on, Michelle. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. So wonderful to meet you, Kamala. Nischala, so wonderful to have you as always. Thank you so much for being here, ladies. Don't forget, y'all, to check out A Woman's Gita, subscribe, and drop some comments for them. Let them know what you're looking for, and they'll meet you. Nischala, I have sent so many students to you and had them email you questions about the Hatha Pradipakita and etc. You know you've responded to some. So they really will listen. If y'all just drop in the comments what you're interested in, they will make it happen. Thank you so much, ladies, for your time.
Thank you, Michelle.
Namaste.
Namaste.